Good morning, everyone. I'm Anita Huberman. I'm CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade. And thank you so much for attending this morning's Surrey Digital Town Hall with a very special guest, BC's Finance Minister, Carole James. And we're going to talk about COVID-19 relief, restart, and recovery for Surrey and for British Columbia. Still at this time, it's important to recognize that we are on the unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Kwantlen-Katzie, Semiahmoo, and Tsawwassen First Nations. And events at the Surrey Board of Trade simply do not happen without sponsorship. Thank you so much to our co-presenting sponsor, Community Savings Credit Union. And you'll hear from them very shortly. Our supporting sponsors are the BM Group of companies. They have an extremely complementary portfolio of construction, project management, and development. And they are contributing to Surrey being an opportunity city and Surrey being the largest city in British Columbia very soon. Also, thank you to our next supporting sponsor, the Port of Vancouver. And the Port of Vancouver, they trade with over 170 world economies. And really, they are significant in ensuring that our global, national, and international supply chains are ensured, that we're getting our goods to market. And thank you so much to our frontline workers at the Port of Vancouver, our marine terminal operators, our truck drivers, our railroaders. Thank you so much for all the work that you're doing. And I'd also like to thank our business center sponsors, the accounting firm of PwC, the law firm of Fasken, and the Chambers of Commerce Group Insurance Plan, represented by SNF Benefits. Just a couple of instructions. All attendees are muted. The session is being recorded. The link will be sent to you after the session is over. We have some introductory remarks and then some questions. And if we do not get to your questions, which you can type into the chat function, we will respond to you after the session is over. And I just wanted to mention that the Surrey Board of Trade, we have a Surrey Pandemic Response Center on our website at businessinsurrey.com. It is updated daily to ensure that there are business information and supports for you. So please take a look at that. The Surrey Board of Trade is one of 9 organizations that sit on the Premier's Economic Recovery Task Force, identifying gaps and opportunities during the pandemic, but also opportunities for economic recovery. The Surrey Board of Trade is also part of the Surrey Economic Recovery Coalition with our local BIAs, as well as different labor groups as well, to ensure we're doing the very same thing, identifying gaps and opportunities during the pandemic and post-pandemic. And we have a direct line right into the Prime Minister's office to do the very same thing. We're all in this together. And we're so pleased at the leadership that our BC government has, and it's shown in terms of this pandemic and ensuring that not only are our residents safe, but also our businesses. So before we begin, I'm going to ask Mike Schilling. He is the president and CEO of Community Savings Credit Union, our co-presenting sponsor, to say a few words. Mike, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anita. As we know, this healthcare crisis has sparked a financial crisis, the likes of which none of us have experienced before. So as you'd expect, Community Savings Credit Union has been very busy at this time. We're helping our members, we're helping our business members and individuals with unique interest-free lending and financial solutions, which are really going to help them bridge over this crisis. We're very proud that through the work of the team, we've kept every branch open every day. And the team here have been working tremendously hard as we realize something which Anita just said, that we are all in this together. And at times of a financial crisis, we realize that businesses need strong financial institutions. And that's what is our job to provide. In terms of a healthcare crisis, BC has led the world in its response and its ability to manage and contain coronavirus. And it's done so, I believe, through a strong partnership between government, businesses, and the people of British Columbia. And we believe that the solution to the financial crisis is exactly the same. And that's why we're so happy to support the Surrey Board of Trade when they bring us all together at the government level, at business and as individuals in this way. So really, that's what we believe we need. We need strong partnerships between government and businesses. We need strong partnerships within the business community, and strong partnerships, really importantly, with the workers who drive what we do across BC. This is going to be the best way for us not only to dig out of this financial crisis, but to build a better economic system, a more resilient businesses, more resilient financial system, and more resilient workforce. So in that sense, it's with real optimism that I have the pleasure of introducing our guest speaker today. I've got some notes here, Mr. James, so hopefully I get all this right. So elected MLA for Victoria Beacon Hill in 2005 and re-elected in 2009, 2013 and 2017. It's becoming somewhat of a habit. Our guest speaker served as the official opposition spokesperson for finance and as opposition critic for children and family development. A community leader for over 25 years, Carole has served as president of the BC School Trustees Association for an unprecedented 5 terms, beginning in 1995. In November 2003, Carole was elected leader of the BC New Democrats and served as leader of the opposition in BC from 2005 to 2010. Quite simply, one of the highest respected politicians we have in the province. Please welcome BC's Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier, Carole James.
Thank you so much, Mike, and thank you, Anita, as well for the invitation to be here today. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'll look forward to that opportunity again sometime, but I think like all of you, we're all figuring out how to work in this new normal that we all have right now. So welcome to the Finance Minister's office. As you can see, I'm one of those very fortunate people who just lives a few blocks away from the legislature. So I'm working part-time from home and part-time from the office as well, as I'm sure many of you are, as I said, as we all learn to adjust through this process. So I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to be able to join you today and to talk a little bit about the direction the government's taking, and then most importantly to hear from you and to hear your questions. I think it's quite extraordinary for all of us when we think back to pre-COVID, and I think back to tabling our budget. It's only been 4 months since we actually tabled the budget in February of 2020, and I'm sure for all of you, like me, it feels like a lifetime ago. We knew going into the pandemic and going into looking at developing the budget that we were seeing some slowdowns in the economy, that we were seeing some moderation in economic growth across the globe, which obviously BC is a small open economy, was going to impact us as a province as well. So in fact, we took that into account as we built Budget 2020. We made sure that we had a strong, resilient economic foundation to be able to build from. We are very fortunate in British Columbia, one of the fastest growing economies, leading the country once again, zero operating debt, the lowest unemployment rate in the country here in British Columbia. So we certainly knew that there were going to be challenges ahead when it came to moderation, but I don't think any of us could imagine the kind of situation that we're all living through now. I think unprecedented is overused, but I can't think of a better term to really describe the kinds of situations that all of us are facing right now. This is unlike, as Mike has said, this is unlike any other kind of challenge that we faced. When you look back to 2008 and the economic crisis in 2008, it really impacted the financial sector and the real estate sector. That really was the challenge that we were facing in that situation. COVID-19 has impacted every sector, every family, every community, every part of our economy really has been impacted. And that's meant that families and individuals and businesses have really been grappling with reduced hours, in many cases complete shutdowns, and the challenges that that brings all across the province. And I think the people that are most hit across families, I remind people that when we talk about businesses being hit, that's individuals and families as well. Not only the business owners, but in fact the employees. Because we know, again, small business really helps drive our economy and provides the jobs that we see in our province. So impacts on businesses aren't simply impacts on business owners, they're impacts on the entire community because of the jobs and the families that are created there. We know that people are keen to get back to work. There's no question about it. But I think it's also important for us to recognize that we need to do that in a very planned and a very careful and a very measured approach. It really is part of what helped us to be able to fight COVID and will help us as we move to economic recovery as well. And that's why it's so critical to hear from you as business owners, to hear about what's happening directly on the ground, to be able to get firsthand the kinds of challenges that you're facing. And we're very fortunate to have Anita on the Premier's economic table on economic recovery and making sure that she brings the issues. And I think she described well the amount of work that the Board of Trade, Surrey Board of Trade, is doing in reaching out and making sure your voice is brought forward. Not only to the Board of Trade, but in fact to the Premier's table as we look at issues as well. It's an opportunity for us to hear firsthand about the kinds of challenges, the opportunities as well, but also the kinds of challenges you're facing. So that's critical from our perspective. And I also want to make sure, and I know most people know the programs that are out there, but I also want to make sure that you know that we have your back as business owners as well. In putting together our COVID-19 plan, we took action in a number of ways. And you will know last week, and this was a call from many small business owners across our province, we took action around the gaps that are there with the federal program around rent assistance for business owners and for tenants who are small business owners. As many of you know, because you've raised your voices, and we certainly heard it through Anita and from businesses directly, that there's a real challenge if a landlord isn't interested in applying for the program because the federal government designed the program that way, the tenant actually couldn't have the opportunity to be able to get that rent relief. And we know how critical cash flow is right now. So we brought in, as you know, last week, an emergency order that will ensure that if a business is able to apply for the program, they fit the criteria, and the landlord isn't interested in applying, that there will not be an eviction permitted. And that will stay in place as long as the federal program is in place and the emergency orders are in place. Again, as an encouragement to those business owners to be able to make sure that they apply for the program and provide that support to small businesses. Now, we recognize there are problems for landlords and owners as well when it comes to the complexity of the program. And again, we have continued, not only myself as finance minister here in the province, but in fact, finance ministers across the country have raised those concerns with the federal government around the design of the program. So we're making sure that that is getting out there and that we're doing what we can to push the federal government to look at how they can adapt that program to fit. We also put in place a number of other initiatives, as you may know, not simply for businesses, but for individuals. We brought in our $1,000 emergency benefit for workers in place. And in July, there'll be a boost to the climate action tax credit. We're increasing that payment, and that won't be a program that people need to apply for. It's done based on income tax, it's income tested, and so it'll provide support for low and modest income families to be able to see an increase there. We've also not only deferred a number of taxes, as many of you will know, we've deferred everything from the employer's health tax to the PST to the hotel tax to the carbon tax. We put those in place, but we also cut property taxes. The school portion, which is the provincial portion of property taxes, we have cut by on the average about 25%. Which again gives that immediate relief. And if you're a business that has a triple net lease and you pay the property taxes through your lease, again, that will give you some relief that's there as well. And then the other piece I just want to mention is the 1.5 billion. So you may know the COVID plan is a $5 billion program. 1.5 billion was put aside for economic recovery. And I think, again, it's critical to note that we did that from the start, because as Dr. Bonnie Henry says often, this is not forever, this is for now. And we know that economic recovery will come. And so with the Premier's task force, we're getting feedback around the gaps out there, the kinds of areas that need to be looked at. And we're also taking a look across the board at the challenges that impact in particular sectors or perhaps a particular age group. You may have seen the employment numbers come out from StatsCan at the end of last week. And those numbers once again showed that the youth are particularly impacted, particularly facing challenges, 18 to 24-year-olds. And that's no surprise when you look at the sectors that are most impacted: retail, restaurants, bars, the creative sector. And so again, we want to make sure that the recovery looks at a whole, looks at all of the issues and areas, and provides an opportunity to be able to put a strong process together. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I know we're all keen to move into recovery. As you know, we're just moving in restart to our phase 2, and we need to make sure, as I said, that we do that well. And part of that, and many of you have reminded us of this, Anita included, around the Premier's table, that we need to also build confidence in the public that this is being done well, because a business can open up, and if there isn't confidence from the public to come and attend that business or to be able to partake in that business, then it's not going to be successful. So our planned approach is very deliberate to make sure that we build that confidence so that people feel comfortable going out in their communities, feel comfortable getting back out shopping, going to a restaurant, enjoying that, and that will benefit not only the public in doing that safely and our health concerns that we need to continue to pay attention to, but it'll also benefit the business in providing an opportunity for that business to be able to have customers coming in. So that's critical. So as we look ahead, we will be engaging through the Premier's task force and engaging through the public, an opportunity for people to give feedback. Our ministers, many of them are already out. I'm sure some of you have had meetings with them. They're out reaching out to their sectors to be able to hear from the sector about the kinds of issues that need to be addressed so that we can bring those into our process. Cabinet obviously makes the ultimate decision, but they will be based on the information and the feedback that we get as we move along. So while it'll be a challenge ahead, there is no question about that. I have also seen extraordinary things through this province and through this difficult time, where people really have pulled together, where creative ideas are coming forward, where people have been adapting the approaches that they've been using for business. And I know it's that kind of creative spirit, it's that kind of entrepreneurism, it's that kind of strength that we've seen from businesses and communities that's going to help us as we build economic recovery as well. So I do feel optimistic about our recovery, and I think it'll be important as we look ahead to support those sectors that will be harder hit, to make sure we're providing the support so they're there to be able to be part of the recovery, and continue working together in the compassion that we've shown each other through the COVID issue as well. So I'll stop there, Anita, and look forward to our dialogue and look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. And to the attendees, if you do have any questions, please type them in the chat function and we'll get to them as soon as we can. Minister, as you've stated, British Columbia has fared very well in comparison to other provinces and territories. And in fact, many of our industries have been able to be essential services, contribute to healthcare retooling. Surrey has the greatest number of manufacturers in British Columbia, for example, and also, you know, has been able to contribute to BC's economy during these pandemic times. But one of the questions that we keep getting, and I know you're familiar with this, and as you look into Budget 2021, and we just presented to the Standing Committee for Finance, is around the employer's health tax. Has there been any consideration to increase that payroll threshold to $1 million instead of 500,000?
We aren't considering it at this point, but it certainly is, as you raised, Anita, it's certainly something I've heard from businesses that when the time is right, that would be one of the things that they'd like us to take a look at. So not in active consideration right now. As I mentioned, we're looking at really the emergency pandemic responses right now and what we can look at. But I think you're, as always, in Surrey Board of Trade ahead of the curve and making sure that you're presenting to the budget, the Select Standing Committee on finance, which is the non-partisan. It's all parties in the legislature involved in that committee. And they're out right now gathering people's feedback around the areas that they're interested in looking at for next year's budget. And so I would encourage people, if you have ideas, to put them forward. We certainly know there are a range of areas that businesses are interested in looking at. There's been discussion around PST and manufacturing as one of the other ideas. So we'll be taking all of those ideas in during the summer months. We'll be taking a look at the approaches that are there and looking at where we can provide that support. Again, as I said, looking at demographics, looking at sectors, and looking at what's going to provide support for the number of unemployed. There was a little bright light, small but a little bright light in the job numbers. We have actually created jobs in British Columbia over this last time period. It was the time period right before our restart, so we're hoping to continue to see that. But regardless of that, you're still talking about over 300,000 jobs lost in British Columbia. That's a huge impact, and we know that those people are going to need support. So not under active consideration now, but certainly I've heard it from businesses, and I expect it'll be one of the ideas that will be coming forward.
You mentioned the 1.5 billion allocation for economic recovery. Can you be more specific in terms of what are government's intentions for its use? Is it around infrastructure or?
So I think it's important, a couple of just context pieces around the 1.5 billion. I think the first one to remind people is that that's one-time money. Just as the total $5 billion was an allocation in the legislature, an additional allocation. And again, I want to give credit to all parties in the legislature. That was an unprecedented day when we came together during the COVID-19 challenge and managed to agree on putting dollars aside to be able to provide the programs and services. So I think it's important to acknowledge that was everyone in the legislature working together. The 1.5 billion, as I said, will be one-time dollars, and we will be gathering the feedback as we're doing now through ministers meeting with their sectors, through the Premier's table and through other areas. Individual business ideas have been coming forward as well. We'll be making a determination around where those dollars can best be used. There will be a separate process, as you mentioned already, for the budget. That process will happen, and so people will have an opportunity to put in things that they would like to see in next year's budget. But the 1.5 really will be looking at, as I mentioned, demographics, sectors. Just to give an example, I expect, and again, I don't want to predetermine any processes, but I expect that education will be a big discussion. Do we look at further training and skills training for the kinds of youth who are having to retool for new kinds of jobs perhaps, or new industries? That may be one of the areas that we look at. We have a large infrastructure spend already in our budget, and again, this was part of our approach in preparing for a moderation in the economy, was to in fact have the largest capital budget in the province's history in the budget 2020. So we have built in there the kind of infrastructure that also will assist as we look ahead into creating jobs. So we have a large amount of infrastructure for everything from hospitals to roads to bridges to transit, and that is in every corner of British Columbia, which again will provide us with a very good base to be able to provide that infrastructure spending and get those jobs going in British Columbia as well.
Minister, I'm interested in your perspective around the economic indicators that you see for BC's fiscal future. Are you looking at, or is government in general looking at, revenue producing opportunities through recovery and job creation?
I would say it's wide open to begin with. I think we have to, in these unprecedented times, we have to be creative in our thinking. I think you've mentioned it, and Mike mentioned it as well, is looking ahead to how we build better. how we address some of the challenges that are there in the economy and in our communities. And I think we have a huge opportunity to do that. Just so people have an idea of timelines, the first quarterly report, so the first report on the first quarter of our fiscal year, will come out probably mid-September. That really will be the first official report of what we're facing in British Columbia and how the economic challenges have impacted all of the kinds of sector indicators and financial indicators that people would imagine, everything from employment to trade, looking at industries. Taking a look at those challenges as well will all be measured, and again will give us an opportunity as we build to economic recovery. Remember, we're in the restart process, but as we build to economic recovery, will give us an idea of the kinds of areas that we really need to focus in on, and certainly new industries, certainly looking at new opportunities. Increasing government revenue is going to be critical if we want to continue to provide the services and supports and programs that are in place. Doing things efficiently. There's been a great deal of discussion coming forward from businesses on things like regulation, and actually making it easier for businesses to be able to invest in British Columbia and move ahead. And so I expect some of those kinds of ideas will come forward as well. It won't always be about spending money. I think it'll also be about how we do things differently and how we provide that support in our province as well.
It really is a time for innovation and new ways of doing things for businesses and governments. Tell me about your perspective on the speculation tax. Is it still a needed tool for the BC government?
I certainly believe so. When you took a look at the stats, when you looked at the impact, the vast majority of British Columbians, over 90%, the vast majority of British Columbians are not paying the speculation tax. It is, in fact, people who live outside of British Columbia, which is the intent, is to provide an opportunity for those people to contribute to the services and supports that everyone uses when they're in British Columbia, like our roads and our bridges and our transportation networks. We will, as we did last year, and as I committed to in the legislation, we will be having a meeting with all the mayors of the impacted areas of the speculation tax. We do that once a year, and it's a great opportunity to be able to hear where there may be some challenges. We did make some small tweaks after the meeting in the summer last year that were important to acknowledge, and so we'll be having that meeting, and it'll be a good chance for the mayors to bring forward their views around the world that's changed and how the speculation tax impacts them. But I think the principles of the speculation tax, providing affordable housing for people in British Columbia, has not changed, and in fact is probably more important than ever. I think one of the things the pandemic has shown us is a number of reminders about the critical nature of putting supports in place for people, and housing is one of those basics. Support for rent, being able to find affordable housing. Those are critical pieces that are going to be needed just as much now as they were a year ago in our economy. So I don't expect you'll see a change, but again, it'll be an opportunity for the mayors to bring their views forward.
You know, the purpose of the Clean BC strategy is for British Columbia to be national and global leaders for bioeconomy. And many great programs are ready to launch, and a well-orchestrated plan is needed. Tell me about your perspective about using some of these task force reports, such as from the Emerging Economy Task Force, the Small Business Task Force. How do we put innovation to work, food security, as part of your BC budget planning?
I think you've described well, Anita, a number of the pieces that have really risen as both challenges and opportunities during the pandemic, and technology would be one of those in particular. I think people often used to think of technology as kind of an extra. Something that some businesses utilize, but not everybody. I think what the pandemic has shown is the need for technology and the touch the technology has across sectors, regardless of what area your business is in, regardless of where you are. If you look at how technology has transformed many of our businesses during the pandemic, it's been a reminder about what a critical nature technology is going to play Clean BC, very similar. People will have heard me say this as I brought the 3 budgets forward that we have brought in as government, that it's not about investing in social programs or investing in economic programs or investing in a clean environment. We have to do all of those, and our investments should look at all of those. They should look at how we can make sure we're doing our part around climate action, how we're doing our part for a clean environment, how we're making sure we're supporting affordability in communities, and how we're strengthening our economy to be sustainable in the long term. So there's been lots of discussion about supply chains over the last number of weeks as people look towards restart. I think it's reminded us about the importance in many areas like PPEs and other equipment to make sure that we have a clear opportunity to look at having that kind of equipment built in British Columbia or close to be accessible for us. And so are there job opportunities there? Food security is another big issue. We've certainly, as a government, as you know, through our Minister of Agriculture, been very active on that file in looking at food security for British Columbia. I think the pandemic has reminded us about how important that is. So I do see opportunities, and I think that the emerging economy task force, the reports that have come forward, give us a path to be able to look at and review as part of our recovery. And I know the ministers in those particular areas will be bringing forward those reports and those ideas for us to take a look at because the creativity really is quite extraordinary across our province.
Every level of government is going to face significant fiscal challenges, including the BC government. Are BC saving bonds being considered as a way to finance investments?
It's certainly something that I've had raised, not only in my walks in my community, where people often will stop to have great conversations, but in fact, some of the proposals that have come forward as well have talked about BC bonds, a pride in our province and an opportunity to be able to contribute as well. So as I said, the door is open to good ideas. The door is open to that creativity. No decisions have been made. The $1.5 billion has not been allocated at this stage. We'll be looking at both the $1.5 billion as well as the budget. So I say keep those good ideas coming, and I'd encourage your members as well to keep those good ideas coming.
Last October, we released Surrey's first ever workforce strategy and labor study with Minister Simpson. And now with the pandemic, you know, there is a need to really support youth and older workers in terms of their training and their upskilling and reskilling, apprenticeships. You know, how are you going to reduce the fear in facilitating a return to work as it relates to training needs and skill needs, and where does the education sector fit into all of this?
Well, I think it's a foundation. It will be a foundation. It's always a foundation of our economy, a foundation of our communities, but certainly will be a foundation from my perspective as we look at economic recovery as well. I think you raised the issue of how people feel safe, and I think that's our first step that we're doing during the restart. As I mentioned, I know people who want to get going and who want to make sure that business is going back to the way it was. And I think, you know, Dr. Bonnie Henry and Minister Dix have reminded us about the importance of doing this well, taking our time, being planned about it. The work that businesses have been doing, and I want to express our appreciation as government to the work businesses have been doing in making sure that they're following the safety guidelines. They're putting those processes in place because that's critical, as I mentioned earlier, to confidence. To building confidence in people getting back out into their community and getting back out to businesses. In education, again, we certainly have, as a government, shown our commitment to education, whether it's the increasing budget in the Ministry of Education and K-12, or whether it's post-secondary and the work we've done around post-secondary. We, in fact, have brought in a number of changes that will benefit people as we move into our economic recovery that were already in the budget. One of these examples, of course, was the first year we brought in our budget where we made English language learning free again, adult basic education training free again. Those are going to be critical pieces as people look at the training they may need to move into another career or another job. They will now have the opportunity, because of the budget from a number of years ago, to be able to get those courses for free. We eliminated interest on student loans. Again, a huge piece to be able to give people a chance to get a start when they come out and not be burdened by the interest on student loans. And we provided support for former youth in care to be able to see free tuition. And that's been extraordinary success around the number of young people who now have hope for a future, who are building that support through post-secondary education. And then coming this fall, of course, we built into the 2020 budget. Coming this fall, we have the BC Access Grant, which will provide an upfront grant of $1,000 to students who are looking to go into programs in university and college. And in fact, we've expanded it. Usually those grants are there for people who are doing degree programs. We expanded that to include diploma and certificate programs for healthcare workers and others who we need in the system, childcare workers, bursaries in place for childcare workers. So building back that education system and providing those supports will again give us that good foundation that I talked about, that we built in those pieces, and I expect it will be a big focus as we look at economic recovery as well.
Minister, you know, in 2007, when I became CEO of the Surrey Board of Trade, we started advocating for childcare investments, housing investments, and from an economic context, business context. And people said, you know, why is the business organization involved in these issues? Well, we know now through the pandemic that these are economic issues. But more specifically, I wanted to ask you about housing. And, you know, there's a lot of red tape at times with municipal governments. How is the BC government investing in housing as it relates to, you know, purpose-built rental, you know, those types of pieces?
So I can't leave childcare without putting in my my support as well for childcare. It's a piece that, as you know, our government is passionate about and made $1 billion investment in our very first budget in coming forward. And I think you've described it well, Anita. It really is an economic program, an economic driver. We've seen that during this pandemic. We've been reminded about the importance of childcare when it comes to building our economy. We know that women still tend to do most of the childcare, and it's tough for women to get back into the workforce after they've been off on maternity leave and are looking at returning. Good quality childcare is the way to be able to provide that support. And if we're going to rebuild our economy, we need to make sure that everyone can contribute in our economy, that we're not leaving people behind. It won't be a strong economy if we're leaving people behind. We need to make sure that we have the opportunity for everyone. So childcare is a critical piece of that. And not only have we put in an investment, we also recognize that we need to value our childcare workers. And so we have bursaries in place. We've increased their wages twice now, an increase now of up to $2 an hour for childcare workers. And there's much more to do, but I think that's been proven out during this time period. Housing as well, just to touch on the housing issue, that's been another area where we knew there was a need, a very different situation when we first were elected. Of course, we saw speculation in the market, we saw out of control prices, we saw sales going through the roof, and we saw British Columbians not able to find homes for themselves, whether it was renting or whether it was buying a home, just didn't have the opportunity to get into the market. So we brought in, as you know, a number of measures, some tax measures, but also some measures that were in partnership with the private sector, where we're building housing. We're building more purpose-built rental housing in this province than has been built in decades. And that's exciting to see, because that provides often the entry level for people getting into renting, which then provides them the opportunity to be able to save dollars and move into looking at buying in the market as well. And most people who work in the real estate field and the housing field will say the biggest, most important piece is to have mobility. The ability for people to move from house to house as their personal family circumstances change, as they get a better job and they're able to spend a little more and want to build that foundation for themselves. And so that's a critical piece as we look at housing. So we're building purpose-built rental, we're building housing for the homeless. As you know, we've really taken on a major spend when it comes to building modular housing and the opportunities for modular housing to be able to take people who have been homeless and provide them with homes. And I have to say, those have been extraordinarily powerful stories when we talk to individuals who talk about their life changing forever. Turning their life around, making connections that they hadn't had before now that they actually have a home. And then we also put in place the Housing Hub, which was to look at creative opportunities for that, what's often called the missing middle. The folks who are just above the low income, but don't have enough still to be able to get into the market, an opportunity for housing in that area as well. And again, creativity is really key for British Columbians when we're looking at the Housing Hub. And one of these examples that the Minister of Housing often uses is a faith community. We've had a couple of people come forward from the faith community where they still have a tract of land, a fairly large tract of land, but a small congregation. And they're looking to see whether they could provide the land and work a partnership with the land, lease the land, so that we could build affordable housing. It meets the needs of their congregation and provides support, meets the needs of the community, and keeps their congregation going. So that's just one idea of the kinds of creativity that's coming forward to provide housing for people. Because again, if we don't ensure we're investing in those basics, we don't ensure we're providing the support when it comes to housing, when it comes to childcare, when it comes to education, we're not going to see the economy grow. It isn't, as I said earlier, it isn't an either or. It's making sure that we do both and that we're building a sustainable economy now and into the future.
You know, when you're talking about innovation, there's been a new framework perhaps that's been discussed around tuition for post-secondary institutions and tuition fees declining, you know, being more accessible, but then that affects the bottom line for post-secondary institutions. For the Surrey Board of Trade, education and transportation are the foundations of driving an economy, and everything flows from there. Can you talk about this new framework that's being discussed around tuition?
Well, I think we have some challenges that are going to come, no question, for universities. As people know, the international travel is probably going to impact international students coming in to universities and colleges and school districts, because we have international students coming in at that level as well. That obviously has an impact on budgets and has an impact on what we're looking at there. There are students who are going to be doing courses online rather than in person in some courses and in some universities and some colleges. So there's discussion about what you do when it comes to addressing that piece as well. So I think, again, it's in the imagining stage, I would suggest, in looking at that kind of creativity and what role technology can play. I think there's also lots of discussion that's been going on that I've heard over the last year as well, just around whether people are looking at degree programs, whether they're looking at diploma programs or certificate programs, having a range of options available for people. Careers change. You know, I think we have to recognize that people will have a number of careers through their lifetime compared to working for one company and staying with one company for most of your career. And that's going to mean being creative again about the kinds of changes that people are going to need, the kinds of opportunities that people are going to need to get back into the workforce. And again, I think youth will be key in this. I come back to the demographics around the job losses we're seeing through COVID. A large portion of those jobs are 18 to 24-year-olds. So how do we support them? How do we ensure they can get the work experience they need? How do we ensure they can get the education they need to be able to get the jobs that will be there and in place and hopefully come through our economic recovery? And that will only happen, again, working with the youth, but also working with businesses, working with industry, making sure that we have those kinds of discussions and partnerships across the province. So it's what makes this kind of opportunity so critical from my perspective when it comes to recovery.
Minister, my last question to you is about the not-for-profit sector. and they are part of our economic development continuum. They contribute so much to the livability of our residents and also for our business community, whether they're a food bank providing housing, immigrant services, etc. Can you tell us about your plans to support not-for-profits post-pandemic?
Well, I've been really pleased. The task force, the Premier's task force that we talked about earlier, has representatives from the not-for-profit sector and has representatives from the cultural sector as well on that committee, because we recognize as a government how critical they are. I often call not-for-profits the fabric of a community. They really are the fabric. They knit together so many groups and organizations. They provide support to people who would otherwise fall through the cracks. They're a critical part of our province and a critical part of our economy as well. They've been hard hit. And again, you know, I think in all of these examples that we've talked about this morning, it's going to take all of us to provide that support. Government will not be able to fix all of the challenges that are here, nor should they. It has to be something that we're working on together. Communities, not-for-profit, individuals, businesses, large and small. Not-for-profits are a good example of that. We know that their donations are dropping, of course, because of the challenges that people are facing. And so it will require all of us to be able to provide that support as we look ahead to not-for-profits. We've provided some support through pandemic pay for a number of groups and organizations who are providing government services through their not-for-profit to make sure that we're providing support there. Some of the not-for-profits as well will have benefited through drops in property taxes if they're paying the property tax as part of their lease as well. And again, we'll be looking at how we continue to build on that strength of that sector as we look at economic recovery, because as you said well, and as I've alluded as well, you're not going to be able to have economic recovery if we're leaving people behind, and the not-for-profit sector is critical to providing that support and being part of that economic recovery as well.
Minister James, thank you so much for being here with the Surrey Board of Trade during this brief time that we have with you. Thank you to our co-presenting sponsor, Community Savings Credit Union, our supporting sponsors, the BM Group of Companies and the Port of Vancouver. And remember, the Surrey Board of Trade is here for you to instigate change at the different levels of government to ensure that you're getting the supports that you need. Minister James, thank you again. And ladies and gentlemen, you may leave the meeting. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And thank you to all your members, all the businesses as well, for the extraordinary work you're doing in the province on behalf of everyone. Thank you.